The train whistle pierced through the hot Colorado afternoon as Margaret Ellen stepped onto the platform at Julesburg Station, her worn carpetbag clutched in gloved hands, searching the sparse crowd for a face she had only seen in a faded photograph tucked inside her reticule. The August heat of 1882 shimmered off the railroad tracks, and dust devils danced in the street beyond the depot. Margaret's heart hammered against her corset as she watched families reunite, cowboys collect supplies, and businessmen stride purposefully away. One by one, the platform emptied until only she remained, a solitary figure in a traveling dress that had seen better days, standing beside a trunk that contained everything she owned in this world. She waited. The sun climbed higher, bearing down mercilessly. Sweat trickled down her spine beneath layers of proper Eastern clothing wholly unsuited to the Colorado plains. An hour passed, then two. The station master, a grizzled man with kind eyes, approached her 3 times to ask if she needed assistance, but Margaret politely declined, maintaining the composure her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Surely there had been some delay. Surely Samuel Hendricks would arrive any moment to claim his mail-order bride. By the time the shadows began to lengthen, even Margaret's determination wavered. She had spent 6 months corresponding with Samuel, a merchant who had promised her a new life far from the suffocating memories of Philadelphia. After her father's death had left her mother and herself destitute, and her mother had succumbed to pneumonia the following winter, Margaret had nothing left but debts, and the cold charity of distant relatives who made their disapproval clear at every turn. Samuel's letters had offered hope, respectability, and escape. Now, standing alone as the platform grew empty and evening approached, Margaret faced a terrible truth. No one was coming. "Miss, I hate to press you, but we are closing up the depot office for the night," the station master said gently. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Margaret's throat tightened. "I am waiting for my betrothed, Samuel Hendricks. Do you know him? Perhaps you could direct me to his establishment." The station master's weathered face clouded with something Margaret could not quite name, pity perhaps, or discomfort. "Samuel Hendricks, the merchant?" "Yes, exactly. We have been corresponding for months. He knew I was arriving today." The older man removed his cap and twisted it in his hands. "Miss, I am real sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Samuel Hendricks married Clara Sutton 3 weeks ago." "Big wedding, half the town attended." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and for a moment she could not draw breath. "That cannot be. We had an arrangement. I have his letters. I sold everything I owned to purchase passage here." "I do not doubt you, miss, but Samuel is married now to a local girl whose father owns the bank. Their courtship was brief, but money talks if you take my meaning." Margaret did take his meaning all too well. She had nothing to offer except herself, while Clara Sutton had apparently brought a substantial dowry. Samuel had simply chosen the more advantageous match and had not bothered to inform the woman traveling across the country to marry him. "Is there family I can wire for you?" the station master asked. "Someone who could send funds for return passage?" "No." The word came out steadier than Margaret felt. "There is no one. The boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson is respectable. I could escort you there, see about getting you a room while you figure things out." "I have very little money. The train ticket took almost everything." The station master's expression grew more troubled. "I see. Well, let me think on this. You cannot sleep on the platform, that is certain." "Sir," a deep voice interrupted their conversation. "Pardon the intrusion, but I could not help overhearing." Margaret turned to find a tall man in worn denim and dusty boots standing a respectful distance away. He held his hat in his hands, revealing sandy hair that fell across his forehead, and his sun-bronzed face held an earnest expression that immediately put her on guard. She had learned the hard way that handsome faces and earnest expressions could hide calculating hearts. "I am Yates Morrison. I have a small ranch about 5 miles from town. My grandmother lives with me, and she has been wanting help with the house and cooking. If you need work and lodging, I could offer both." The station master brightened. "Yates is good people, miss. His grandmother Josephine is one of the finest ladies in the county." Margaret studied the cowboy before her. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands that spoke of hard labor. His face was honest, with laugh lines at the corners of blue eyes that met hers directly. He was perhaps 25 or 26, only a few years older than her own 22. But she had trusted Samuel Hendricks based on letters and promises, and look where that had led. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morrison, but I do not know you. For all I know, you could be a scoundrel or worse," he finished for her, nodding. "You are right to be cautious. Tell you what, why do not I take you to meet my grandmother first? She is in town staying with the preacher's wife while I conduct some business. You can speak with her and she can vouch for the arrangement. If you are uncomfortable with any part of it, no obligation." It was a reasonable suggestion, more reasonable than Margaret had any right to expect from a stranger. Still, she hesitated. "Miss," Yates said quietly, "I was here earlier when you first arrived. I saw you waiting. I know what it feels like to be left standing alone when you expected something different. I just want to help, nothing more. My grandmother really does need assistance, and I can pay fair wages, provide separate quarters in the house, and I promise you will be treated with complete respect." Something in his voice, a thread of genuine understanding, made Margaret's decision. She had no other options after all. The alternative was sleeping on the street with no prospects and dwindling funds. "Very well. I will meet your grandmother." Relief flooded Yates's features. He collected her trunk as though it weighed nothing, balancing it on one shoulder while offering his other arm to steady her down the platform steps. Margaret accepted, too exhausted and overwhelmed to maintain her guard entirely. They walked through Julesburg's Main Street, as dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The town was rough around the edges, with saloons and supply stores dominating the storefronts. But Margaret also noticed a church with a white steeple, a schoolhouse, and neat homes with flower boxes that suggested civilization had taken root here despite the wild surroundings. Yates led her to a tidy house beside the church, where a woman in her 60s sat on the porch with another lady of similar age. Both looked up as they approached. "Grandma Jo, this is Miss Margaret Ellen." She arrived today expecting to meet Samuel Hendricks, but he apparently neglected to inform her of his recent marriage. "She needs work and lodging. I offered her the housekeeper position we discussed." Josephine Morrison rose with surprising grace for her age. She had snow-white hair pulled into a neat bun and sharp eyes that assessed Margaret thoroughly, but not unkindly. "That snake Samuel Hendricks. Pardon my language, dear, but any man who leaves a lady stranded deserves worse than I just called him. You look absolutely exhausted. Come sit down." Margaret found herself guided into a rocking chair and presented with a glass of cold water before she could fully process what was happening. Josephine's companion, introduced as Reverend Hale's wife Martha, immediately disappeared inside and returned with fresh bread and butter. "Eat, child. You have had a terrible shock, but things are not as dark as they seem right now." As Margaret ate, Josephine explained the situation at the Morrison Ranch. "My grandson works himself to the bone trying to manage the cattle and the property. I do my best, but my hands are not what they used to be, and I cannot keep up with the cooking and cleaning as I once did. We need help. Yates is offering fair wages, $20 a month plus room and board. You would have your own bedroom on the ground floor near mine. Yates sleeps in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, so propriety is maintained. 1 day off per week to come to town for church and shopping if you wish. $20 a month was more than generous for such work. Margaret knew she was being offered charity disguised as employment, but pride seemed a foolish luxury when she was destitute. "Why are you being so kind to a stranger?" Margaret asked, looking between Josephine and Yates. The older woman smiled sadly. "Because I know what it is like to be alone in the world with nowhere to turn. When my husband died 20 years ago, we had nothing. I was about to lose our land when neighbors helped us through. Kindness was paid to me when I most needed it. I am simply passing it along." Yates shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "So what do you say, Miss Ellen? Will you give us a trial period? If you do not like the arrangement after a week, I will personally pay for a train ticket to wherever you wish to go." Margaret looked at this man who had every reason to walk past a stranger's troubles, who had instead stopped and offered a solution. His grandmother radiated warmth and genuineness. The preacher's wife nodded encouragingly. What choice did Margaret have, really? And more than that, what did her instincts tell her? They told her that Yates Morrison meant what he said. "I accept your offer, Mr. Morrison. Thank you." The smile that broke across his face transformed it entirely, revealing dimples and genuine joy that he had been able to help. "Call me Yates, please. We do not stand much on formality out here." "Then you must call me Margaret." They stayed in town that night, with Margaret sharing a room at the boarding house with Josephine while Yates bedded down at the livery stable with his horse. In the morning, they set out for the ranch in a wagon laden with supplies Yates had purchased during his trip to town. The ride took them across open plains, where grass stretched endlessly beneath a sky so vast it made Margaret dizzy. Mountains rose in the distant west, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. It was beautiful in a way wholly different from Philadelphia's brick streets and tidy parks. Here, nature dominated, wild and untamed and glorious. Yates proved to be an easy companion during the journey. He pointed out landmarks, explained the workings of his ranch, and asked Margaret thoughtful questions about her life back east without pressing when she grew uncomfortable. Josephine dozed in the back of the wagon, lulled by the steady movement. "I hope you will forgive my forwardness yesterday," Yates said as they neared the ranch. "When I overheard what happened, I just could not walk away. My mother was a mail-order bride. She traveled from St. Louis to marry my father, and by all accounts, it was a successful match. They built this ranch together before fever took them both when I was 15. I suppose I thought of her when I saw you standing there alone." "I am sorry for your loss," Margaret said softly. "You have had your share of grief." "Haven't we all?" He glanced at her with understanding in those blue eyes. "Life out here is hard, but it is also honest. People show you who they really are pretty quick when you are all depending on each other for survival. I think you will find that refreshing after dealing with someone like Samuel Hendricks. I was such a fool to trust him based only on letters. You were not a fool. You were hopeful, and that is different. He was the one who behaved dishonorably, not you." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, eased some of the shame that had been burning in Margaret's chest since yesterday. She had done nothing wrong. She had been honest and honorable in their correspondence. Samuel's betrayal was his failing, not hers. The ranch came into view, a sturdy 2-story house built of timber and stone, flanked by a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed. It sat in a valley with a creek running nearby, cottonwood trees providing shade. The setting was picturesque, almost idyllic. Two ranch hands emerged from the barn as they approached. Yates introduced them as Jack and Pete, cowboys in their 30s who had worked for the Morrison family for years. Both tipped their hats respectfully to Margaret and welcomed her with easy Western friendliness that lacked the stiff formality she was accustomed to back east. The house interior was clean but clearly maintained by someone whose priorities lay elsewhere. Dust coated the furniture, dishes were stacked in the kitchen, and the curtains needed washing. Josephine showed Margaret to her room, a pleasant space with a window overlooking the creek and simple but sturdy furniture. "I know it needs work," Josephine said. "I keep telling Yates I can manage, but truthfully, I am just too old to do it all anymore. You will be a blessing to this household, dear." Margaret unpacked her few belongings and changed into a simple work dress more suitable for the tasks ahead. When she emerged, she found Josephine already compiling a list of priorities while Yates brought in firewood and water from the pump. They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Margaret rose early to prepare breakfast for the household, cooked hearty meals suited to men who worked hard physical labor all day, and spent hours cleaning and organizing the house. Josephine helped as she was able, but more than that, she provided companionship and stories about the ranch's history. Yates proved to be exactly what he had promised, a respectful employer who worked alongside his men from dawn to dusk. He was patient when Margaret made mistakes, like the time she used too much salt in the stew or when she hung the wash in a spot where it got covered in dust kicked up by the horses. He simply smiled, showed her the right way, and thanked her for her efforts. It would have been easy to dismiss him as simple or uneducated, but Margaret quickly learned that Yates Morrison was neither. He read extensively, kept careful accounts of his ranch's finances, and spoke thoughtfully about everything from politics to philosophy. His education had come from life experience and voracious reading rather than formal schooling, but he was nevertheless one of the most intelligent men Margaret had ever encountered. She also could not help but notice that he was handsome. Not in the refined way of Philadelphia gentlemen with their tailored suits and pomaded hair, but in a raw, masculine way that made her pulse quicken when he came in from the range, sun-bronzed and smiling, asking if there was any of her excellent coffee left. By the end of the first week, Margaret knew she would not be requesting that train ticket Yates had promised. This rough ranch house in the middle of the Colorado plains felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since her father's death. Sunday arrived, and true to his word, Yates drove Margaret and Josephine into Julesburg for church services. Margaret wore her best dress, carefully mended and pressed, and tried not to feel self-conscious as they entered the small church building. Samuel Hendricks sat in the third pew with a pretty blonde woman who must be his new wife, Clara. When he saw Margaret, his face drained of color, but he quickly looked away, whispering something to Clara that made the blonde woman stare at Margaret with undisguised curiosity and hostility. Margaret lifted her chin and walked past them without acknowledgement. She would not give Samuel the satisfaction of seeing her distress. Yates guided her to a pew near the front, where several families greeted them warmly. A young woman with kind eyes introduced herself as Emma, and immediately invited Margaret to join the ladies' quilting circle that met on Wednesday afternoons in town. After the service, Samuel approached as people milled about outside. "Miss Ellen, I must speak with you." "I cannot imagine what we have to discuss, Mr. Hendricks. I want to apologize. Things moved quickly with Clara, and I simply did not have time to send word before you left Philadelphia. It was poor timing, nothing personal." Yates materialized at Margaret's side, not touching her, but standing close enough that his protective presence was unmistakable. "I think Miss Ellen understands perfectly that your actions revealed your character, Hendricks. No need to compound dishonor with hollow apologies." Samuel's face flushed red. "This does not concern you, Morrison. Miss Ellen works for my family, so it absolutely concerns me. I suggest you return to your wife and leave Miss Ellen alone." Clara had joined them now, linking her arm possessively through Samuel's. "Come along, dear." The merchant's wife should not waste time speaking with the hired help. The insult was deliberate and cutting. Margaret felt heat flood her cheeks, but before she could respond, Josephine stepped forward. "Clara Sutton, your father may own the bank, but that does not give you the right to disrespect anyone. Margaret Ellen is worth 10 of you, and everyone here knows that Samuel Hendricks is a man who breaks his word. That reflects on you now, dear, whether you like it or not." Several people nearby murmured agreement. Clara's face went splotchy with anger, and she pulled Samuel away without another word. "Do not let them bother you," Emma said, appearing with several other women. Clara has always thought herself better than everyone else, and Samuel showed his true colors. "You are well rid of him. Now, tell me you will come to quilting this Wednesday. We would love to have you." The warmth and acceptance from these near strangers was overwhelming. Margaret found herself agreeing, grateful for their kindness. On the ride home, Josephine patted Margaret's hand. "You handled that beautifully, dear. Held your head high and did not sink to their level." "I wanted to slap him," Margaret admitted. Yates laughed, a rich sound that made Margaret smile despite everything. "You and me both. But Grandma Jo is right, you took the high road. That matters out here." That night, as Margaret prepared for bed, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed in just 1 week. She had arrived in Colorado expecting to marry a man she barely knew. Instead, she had found employment, friendship, and something that felt like belonging in this unlikely place. She also could not deny the growing attraction she felt toward Yates Morrison. It complicated everything, this pull toward a man who was technically her employer, a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect when she had every reason to distrust male promises. Margaret told herself to be practical, to focus on building her new life without romantic entanglements. She had learned that lesson the hard way. But then Yates would smile at her across the dinner table, or thank her for some small service, or share an observation that made her laugh, and Margaret felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. The summer weeks flowed into each other, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Margaret learned to read the weather, to judge when storms were coming across the plains. She mastered the temperamental stove and began experimenting with recipes that delighted the ranch hands. She helped Josephine with her garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. She attended church and quilting circles, gradually becoming part of the community. And always, there was Yates. He would catch her eye during meals and smile as though they shared a secret. He began finding excuses to linger in the kitchen after breakfast, drinking one more cup of coffee while asking about her plans for the day. When a rattlesnake appeared near the clothesline, he killed it swiftly and then spent an hour teaching Margaret to recognize the warning signs of snake presence. When she mentioned missing books, he presented her with a stack from his own collection the next day. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said, almost shyly. "The poetry is my mother's. I think she would have liked knowing someone else appreciated it." Margaret accepted the precious volumes with trembling hands, understanding that this was trust, intimacy of a kind that had nothing to do with physical touch, and everything to do with emotional vulnerability. She stayed up late that night reading his mother's poetry collection, finding notations in the margins in a feminine hand, and felt closer to understanding Yates through these glimpses of the woman who had raised him. September brought cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. The ranch operated at full capacity, with cattle being moved to different pastures, hay being cut and stored, fences being repaired. Everyone worked long hours, and Margaret rose even earlier to pack substantial lunches for the men working far from the house. One afternoon, Yates returned earlier than expected, leading his horse who was clearly favoring one leg. Margaret was in the garden and she stood as he approached. "Is your horse all right?" "Through a shoe, and I think he might have bruised his hoof. I will walk him to the barn, let him rest." Yates paused, studying her. "You have dirt on your face." Margaret raised a hand self-consciously to her cheek, but Yates closed the distance between them. "Here, let me." His callous thumb brushed across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness, wiping away the smudge. The touch lasted only a moment, but it sent electricity through Margaret's entire body. Their eyes met and held. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes. I know you came here under difficult circumstances. I know you probably need time before you can think about trusting anyone again. But I cannot keep pretending that my feelings are just those of an employer. Somewhere between that first day on the train platform and now, I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Yates stepped back, giving her space. "You do not have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know. Nothing has to change. You still have your position here, regardless of whether you feel the same way. I just could not keep it to myself anymore." He turned to lead his horse away, but Margaret found her voice. "Wait." He stopped, hope and fear warring on his expressive face. "I feel the same way," Margaret said, the words rushing out. "I have been trying to be sensible, but Yates, I have fallen in love with you too." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun rising. He dropped his horse's reins and crossed back to her in 3 long strides. "Do you mean it?" "Yes, completely. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Yates cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes. "May I kiss you?" Margaret answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, the first of what she hoped would be thousands more. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly. I want to court you, take you to dances, give you the romance you deserve. And when the time is right, I want to marry you if you will have me. I cannot think of anything I want more." They stood in the garden, holding each other as the afternoon sun painted everything golden, and Margaret marveled at how her greatest disaster had led her to this moment, to this man, to this love that felt like coming home. Josephine found them there some time later and laughed with pure delight. "Well, it is about time you two figured it out. I have been watching you dance around each other for months." "You knew?" Margaret asked, blushing. "Of course I knew. I am old, not blind. Now come inside, both of you. We should celebrate with something special for dinner." The months that followed were the happiest of Margaret's life. True to his word, Yates courted her properly. He took her to the harvest dance in town, where they spun across the floor until they were both dizzy with laughter. He brought her wildflowers from the plains. He read poetry to her in the evenings while Josephine pretended to be absorbed in her knitting but smiled at them both. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Margaret shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, the good memories before loss had claimed everything she loved. Yates told her about his dreams for the ranch, his hopes to expand the herd and perhaps one day open a horse breeding operation. "I want to build something lasting," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Something we can pass down to our children. Our children." Margaret's heart fluttered at the implication. Yates took her hand. "I am getting ahead of myself, but yes, I hope for children with you, Margaret. A whole houseful if we are so blessed. I think you would be an amazing mother." "I hope for the same things," she admitted. A family, a home filled with love and laughter. Everything my parents had before fate intervened. Winter arrived with the first significant snowfall in November. The ranch work continued, but at a different pace, with more time spent in the barn tending animals and less time on the range. Margaret perfected her bread making and learned to cook hearty stews that warmed everyone from the inside out. On a clear December evening, Yates asked Margaret to walk with him despite the cold. She bundled into her warmest shawl and followed him to the creek, where cottonwood trees stood bare against a sky brilliant with stars. "You remember the first day we met?" Yates asked. "How could I forget? You were the only person who stopped to help me. I told you then that I knew what it felt like to be left standing alone when you expected something different. What I did not tell you was that I had given up on finding love. I thought perhaps it was not meant for me, that I would just work the ranch and grow old alone. And then you stepped off that train, looking so brave even though you were terrified, and something in my chest just knew." "Knew what?" Yates dropped to one knee in the snow, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Knew that you were the one I had been waiting for. Margaret Ellen, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love you, respect you, stand beside you through whatever life brings. I promise to build a home with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. I cannot promise riches, but I can promise that you will be loved every single day for the rest of your life." Tears streamed down Margaret's face, freezing in the cold air. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around. Their laughter echoed across the frozen landscape, pure joy released into the night. "It was my mother's ring," Yates said when he finally set her down. "Grandma Jo saved it for me, hoping I would find someone worthy of it. She will be thrilled." They returned to the house where Josephine was indeed thrilled, embracing them both and immediately beginning to plan a wedding. Spring would be lovely when the wildflowers are blooming. "Or we could do it sooner if you prefer, perhaps right after the new year." Margaret and Yates exchanged glances. "Right after the new year sounds perfect," Margaret said. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Margaret sewed a wedding dress from fabric that Yates purchased on a trip to Denver, cream-colored wool with delicate buttons down the back. Josephine baked fruitcakes and coordinated with the church ladies. Yates worked with Reverend Hale on the ceremony details and added a room onto the house, what would become their private bedroom. "I want you to feel like this is truly your home," he explained to Margaret as they examined the new construction. "A place that is ours, built for our life together." On a bright January morning in 1883, Margaret walked down the aisle of the Julesburg church on Jack's arm, since he had graciously offered to stand in for her absent father. She wore her new dress and carried winter greenery mixed with dried flowers. Every pew was filled with people who had become friends, who had welcomed her into their community. And at the front stood Yates, impossibly handsome in a new suit, looking at her with such love that she could barely breathe. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love and partnership and faith. When Reverend Hale pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with tender passion that made several ladies sigh and others chuckle. The reception at the town hall featured music, dancing, and more food than seemed possible. Samuel and Clara Hendricks had not been invited, but Margaret would not have noticed them anyway. She had eyes only for her new husband, who held her close during every dance and looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in the world. "How did I get so lucky?" Yates whispered in her ear as they swayed to a slow waltz. "We both got lucky," Margaret corrected. "The worst day of my life led me to the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you, Margaret Morrison." "I love you too, Yates Morrison, for always." They spent their wedding night in the new room Yates had built, a fire crackling in the hearth to ward off winter's chill. He was gentle and patient, making sure Margaret felt safe and cherished as they came together for the first time. Afterwards, they lay tangled in each other's arms, talking and laughing and learning each other's bodies with wondering hands. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Margaret said, tracing patterns on Yates's chest. "Just wait," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "It gets even better from here." He was right. Their first year of marriage flew by in a blur of joy and hard work. Margaret fully embraced her role as Yates's wife and partner. She kept the books for the ranch, discovering she had a talent for numbers and organization. She expanded the garden, putting up preserves for winter. She helped nurse sick cattle and learned to ride a horse competently enough to occasionally help move the herd. Yates treated her as an equal partner in all decisions, asking her opinion on everything from which bulls to purchase to whether they should expand the bunkhouse. He was affectionate and attentive, never missing an opportunity to kiss her or tell her he loved her. Even after long days of exhausting work, he made time for them. Their physical relationship deepened and evolved as they learned what pleased each other. Margaret discovered that she was not the fragile, passionless creature she had been raised to believe proper women should be. With Yates, she was free to express desire and passion without shame. He worshipped her body and welcomed her explorations of his, and their lovemaking was by turns playful, tender, and intensely passionate. In the spring, Margaret realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure before telling Yates, wanting to be certain before raising hopes. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, Yates lifted her into his arms and carried her around the kitchen while whooping with joy. Josephine laughed until she cried, thrilled at the prospect of a great-grandchild. "I am going to be a father," Yates kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Margaret's pregnancy was relatively easy, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable and she tired more easily. Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried that she was working too hard. He took over more of the household tasks and hired a young girl from town to help with the heavy cleaning. "I am pregnant, not dying," Margaret finally said with exasperation after he refused to let her carry a basket of laundry. "I know, but you are carrying the most precious cargo in the world, our child. Please let me take care of you." How could she argue with that? Their son was born in early January of 1884, on a cold, clear morning just as the sun rose. The labor was long and difficult, but when Yates was finally allowed into the room and the midwife placed the squalling infant in his arms, Margaret thought she had never seen her husband look more terrified or more in love. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Margaret, you did it. He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James Morrison after both their fathers. He had Yates's blue eyes and Margaret's dark hair, and from the start, he was adored by everyone on the ranch. Josephine spent hours rocking him and singing old lullabies. The ranch hands carved him toys and competed to make the baby smile. Yates was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor during fussy nights, and narrating his daily activities to Thomas as though the infant understood every word. "I want him to know my voice," Yates explained when Margaret found him in the barn, baby strapped to his chest while he worked. "I want him to feel secure and loved every moment of his life." Margaret fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him with their son. The years flowed by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under their management. They added to the herd, improved the facilities, and gained a reputation for quality livestock. Margaret proved to have a sharp business mind, negotiating favorable prices with buyers and managing their finances so well that they were able to save and invest. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who adored his father and followed him everywhere. When he was 3, Margaret discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she delivered twin girls, Sarah Rose and Emma Grace, named for her mother and the friend who had first welcomed her to Julesburg. The twins were handfuls, 2 blonde whirlwinds who kept the entire household running. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Yates built them a dollhouse that was the envy of every child in the county, and he spent hours having tea parties with his daughters, looking ridiculous and happy with a tiny cup in his large hands. "Never thought I would see Yates Morrison at a tea party," Jack commented one afternoon, grinning. "Those girls have him wrapped around their little fingers," Pete agreed. Yates did not care. "My daughters are perfect, and if they want tea parties, then I will attend every single one." When the twins were 2 and Thomas was 5, Josephine passed away peacefully in her sleep. The loss hit them all hard. She had been the heart of their household, the matriarch who held them together. They buried her next to Yates's parents on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Margaret planted roses on her grave that bloomed every summer. "She lived to see us build our family," Yates said as they stood at the grave site with their children. "She told me the day before she died that she was so proud of us, that we had created something beautiful together." "We did," Margaret agreed, holding tight to his hand. "And we will keep building it for her and for them." She gestured to their children, Thomas trying to be brave and not cry, the twins not fully understanding but sensing the sadness around them. Life continued, as it always did. Thomas started school and proved to be a gifted student. The twins learned to ride horses almost before they could walk properly. Margaret became a pillar of the community, organizing charity drives and helping newcomers settle into the area. Yates served on the town council and helped establish new schools and churches as the territory developed. When Margaret was 30, she gave birth to their 4th child, another boy they named William, after Yates's grandfather. He was a calm baby, so different from his energetic siblings, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. "I think we might have a scholar here," Yates said, watching infant William stare intently at a book Margaret was reading aloud. He was right. William grew into a thoughtful boy who preferred books to horses, though he learned ranch work alongside his brother. Thomas was clearly destined to take over the ranch one day, but William dreamed of becoming a teacher. "That is wonderful," Margaret told him when he shyly shared his aspirations at age 10. "The world needs good teachers as much as it needs good ranchers. You are not disappointed. Never. We want you to follow your heart, whatever that means." The twins, meanwhile, shocked everyone by announcing at age 16 that they wanted to become doctors. Clara wanted to serve frontier communities with limited medical care, and Emma wanted to study diseases and find cures. "We can do it," Sarah insisted when people expressed doubt. "There are medical schools accepting women now. We will find a way." Yates and Margaret supported them completely, though sending their daughters east for education was one of the hardest things they ever did. They returned home qualified physicians who opened a practice together in Denver, but visited the ranch often. Thomas married a local girl named Lucy, and brought her to live at the ranch, building a house of their own nearby but working the land alongside Yates. They gave Margaret and Yates 6 grandchildren who filled the property with noise and joy. William earned a teaching certificate and took a position at the Julesburg School, later becoming principal. He married a quiet librarian named Anne, and they had 2 scholarly children who loved books as much as their parents did. The years accumulated, marked by weddings and births, losses and celebrations. Yates's hair went silver, and Margaret's developed threads of white. Lines appeared on their faces, marks of years spent squinting into the sun and laughing together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over land they had nurtured for decades. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a celebration, and the house rang with the sounds of family. "You ever think about that day on the train platform?" Yates asked, his arm around Margaret's waist. "When you arrived and no one was there to meet you." "Sometimes," Margaret admitted, but only to marvel at how everything worked out. "Samuel Hendricks did me the greatest favor of my life when he abandoned me. If he had not, I never would have found you." "I saw you standing there and I just knew," Yates said, echoing words he had spoken so many years ago. "Knew you were someone special, someone worth knowing." "You said you would stand beside me," Margaret remembered, "and you have every single day since." "Always," Yates promised, kissing her temple. "For as long as I draw breath, I will stand beside you." Inside, their grandson called for them to come cut the cake. They turned together, hands linked as they had been for 30 years, and walked into the house filled with the family they had built from nothing but love and determination. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared across generations. Margaret watched Yates swing their youngest granddaughter around the room, the little girl shrieking with delight, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This life, this family, this love, had all grown from the seeds planted on that terrible day when she stood alone and abandoned on a train platform. Yates had appeared like Providence, offering help when she most needed it, and together they had built something remarkable. Later, after everyone had finally gone to bed and the house was quiet, Yates and Margaret sat on their bed in the room he had built for them so long ago. "Tired?" he asked, brushing hair from her face with familiar tenderness. "Happily exhausted," Margaret replied. "It was a perfect day." "Every day with you is perfect." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space she had occupied for 3 decades. "I love you, Yates Morrison. Thank you for seeing me that day, for stopping when everyone else walked by. I love you, Margaret Morrison. Thank you for trusting me, for building this life with me." He kissed her softly. "Thank you for being mine." They made love slowly, tenderly, with the ease of long practice and deep knowledge of each other. Afterwards, they lay entwined in the darkness, listening to the house settle around them and the wind whisper across the plains outside. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked. "I am thinking about how grateful I am, for all of this, for all of you. I came to Colorado expecting one life and found something so much better. I found home. I found love. I found purpose. And it all started because you had a kind heart and offered help to a stranger. Best decision I ever made," Yates murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Love you." "Love you too. Always." Margaret lay awake a while longer, listening to her husband's breathing deepen into sleep. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky, the same stars that had witnessed her arrival all those years ago. She had been so lost then, so frightened and alone. Now she was found, surrounded by family and love, rooted in this place that had become her own. The seasons continued their eternal rotation. Spring brought new calves and foals. Summer meant long days of ranch work. Autumn was harvest time, and winter brought the family together around warm fires. Margaret and Yates grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They celebrated 40 years of marriage, then 45. Their grandchildren gave them great-grandchildren, tiny babies who gurgled in their arms and made them feel the weight and gift of years. "We have been so blessed," Margaret said one evening as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch, watching yet another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "We have," Yates agreed. His hands were gnarled now with arthritis, but they still reached for hers instinctively. "Do you have any regrets?" Margaret considered the question seriously. Did she regret leaving Philadelphia? No. Did she regret trusting those letters from Samuel Hendricks that had led her west? Not even a little, since they had brought her to this place, to Yates. Did she regret anything about the life they had built together? Not one, she finally said. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge, they all led us here. How could I regret any of it? Yates raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Nor I, my love, nor I. When Margaret was 68, she fell ill with pneumonia. For a week, she battled the disease that had taken her mother, and for a week, Yates barely left her side. Their children gathered, worried, praying. The doctor did what he could, but everyone knew that at this age, with this illness, the outcome was uncertain. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, fever burning through her. In her lucid moments, she would find Yates sitting beside the bed, holding her hand, his weathered face creased with worry. "Still here," she whispered once. "Still here," he confirmed. "Always. You remember your promise to stand beside me. Every day of my life I have kept that promise. I am not stopping now." She squeezed his hand weakly. "Good, because I am not ready to leave you yet. We have more sunsets to watch." "As many as you want," Yates said, his voice breaking. "Please fight, Margaret. Please stay with me." She did fight. With the same determination that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown at her, Margaret battled the illness. Slowly, day by day, she grew stronger. The fever broke, her breathing eased, and color returned to her cheeks. "You are too stubborn to die," Clara said with relief when Margaret finally sat up and asked for real food. "I learned from the best," Margaret replied, looking at Yates, who had finally been convinced to rest properly now that the crisis had passed. It took weeks for Margaret to fully recover, but recover she did. By spring, she was back to her normal activities, perhaps moving a bit slower but still fully engaged with life. "You gave me such a scare," Yates confessed one night as they prepared for bed. "I gave myself a scare," Margaret admitted, "but I meant what I said. I am not ready to leave you yet. When the time comes, whenever that is, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Margaret crossed to him and cupped his face in her hands. "And loving you has been mine. But that time is not now. We have more life to live, my darling. Years more if I have any say in it." They had 5 more years. 5 years of watching great-grandchildren grow, of seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's capable management, of quiet evenings on the porch and warm nights in each other's arms. 5 years of love deepened by time, made precious by the knowledge that it was finite. Yates went peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76. One moment he was beside Margaret, breathing steadily, his hand resting on her shoulder as it had every night of their marriage. The next, he was gone, slipping away so quietly she did not realize until morning. The grief was devastating. Margaret felt as though part of herself had been torn away. For 50 years, Yates had been her partner, her love, her home. The world seemed diminished without him in it, but she was not alone. Their children surrounded her, supporting her through the shock and pain. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house, a living testament to the love she and Yates had shared. They buried him on the hillside next to his grandmother and parents, overlooking the ranch he had loved. Margaret stood at the gravesite, supported by Thomas on one side and William on the other, and spoke words from her heart. "You kept your promise," she said to the simple headstone that bore his name. "You stood beside me every day, through everything life brought. You were my partner, my love, my heart. Thank you for seeing me that day on the platform. Thank you for every day after. I will love you until I draw my last breath, and then I will find you again, wherever souls go when this life is done." Margaret lived another 2 years, remaining at the ranch house, surrounded by family. She spent her days with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of Yates and their life together, making sure the legacy of their love was passed down through generations. On a warm summer evening, sitting in her favorite rocking chair on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains she had come to love, Margaret closed her eyes and simply did not open them again. She went peacefully, a smile on her face, her last thoughts of the sandy-haired cowboy who had stopped to help a stranded woman so many years ago. They buried her beside Yates, finally reunited. The headstone reads simply, "Margaret Morrison, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she was never alone." The ranch continued, passed down through Thomas's line, generation after generation. The story of Margaret and Yates became family legend, told to children and grandchildren, a tale of how love could grow from the worst circumstances, how kindness could change everything, how two people could build something lasting together. The house Yates had built still stood a century later, lovingly maintained by descendants who honored the love story that had started there. Visitors would sometimes pause on the porch and imagine they could feel the presence of the couple who had sat there so many evenings, watching sunsets and talking about their day. In Julesburg, a historical marker was eventually placed at the train station, noting that this was where Margaret Ellen had arrived in 1882, where Yates Morrison had first offered help, where a love story that inspired generations had begun. School children would visit on field trips and hear about the mail-order bride who was abandoned and the cowboy who stood beside her, because some love stories transcend their moment, becoming something larger, something that speaks to the fundamental human need for connection and compassion. Margaret and Yates's story was one of those rare tales that reminded people what mattered most, seeing someone who needs help and choosing to act, trusting when trust seems impossible, building something beautiful together through years of daily choice and commitment. Their story proved that the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, that disasters can become blessings, that being abandoned can lead to being found. It showed that real love is not just passion and romance, though they had plenty of both. Real love is partnership and respect, laughter and tears, standing beside someone through whatever life brings and choosing them again every single day. On that train platform in 1882, Margaret had been alone and afraid, with nothing but a carpetbag and broken dreams. Yates had been a young rancher, working hard and wondering if love would ever find him. Together, they had built a life, a family, a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. She had been the only bride no one came to meet. He had said he would stand beside her. And from that moment, from that simple act of human kindness and the love that grew from it, came a story that proved the enduring power of compassion, trust, and choosing love even when everything suggests caution. Years became decades, decades became a century, and still their story endured, passed down through generations of Morrisons who carried their DNA and their values. In the hardness of the world, in times of trouble and change, their descendants would remember Margaret and Yates and know that love could conquer anything if you let it, if you worked for it, if you chose it every single day. And on quiet evenings in Colorado, when the sun sets over the plains in brilliant shades of orange and gold, some swear they can still sense them there. The abandoned bride and the cowboy who stopped to help, sitting together on a porch that has long since weathered, watching the land they loved, their hands clasped together for all eternity. The end.